So we're moving into talking a little bit about predictability and innovation, sport coach training and innovation as a public health initiative with Dr. Rob King. And Dr. Rob King is currently at the United States Sports Academy, but has a long history, again, in this movement and within this area, going back to being one of the early presidents of NKC, when NKC, the accrediting body within the USCCE, was still within AFERD, which is now SHAPE. So we have a lot of history and a lot of passion, again, through our speakers, and looking forward to seeing what Dr. King has to bring to us.
All right, thank you, Kristen. I was kind of holding my breath. I wasn't sure what you were going to introduce me with. She's got a lot of stories about me. Again, thank you. I heard a couple of terms that have been kicked around today. And first I thought I wasn't quite sure what everybody was going to focus on today, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just do like 10 minutes riffing on what everybody else talked about today, because that information is so important. But it turns out that I think that this will be kind of a nice way of taking a step back from all of the very specific and very valuable information that's been presented so far, and maybe coming at this whole idea from a little different concept. So the first thing that I was told to do in every presentation is have the audience do something, like right in the first couple of minutes. So first I want to check your motor skills. Like, I want everybody to go ahead and snap. Show me your best A-move snapping. Okay. So now I'm going to ask you to vote using that highly developed snapping skill that you just rehearsed. I'm going to put a statement up on the slide, and then when you see the word that matches your response, I want you to snap as loud as you can. All right, and the statement is, education and training are the same thing? Yes? No. All right, we have the all PhD room here. But even with that vote, with the snaps, you might have noticed that the words education and training and development kind of had some overlap in the way that they were used. So just to provide a little context for what I'm going to get to in the second half of my 10 minutes or so, very quickly we're going to say, so what is training? One definition, and the one that we're going to use today, is that it's about teaching people to think alike. So when we are doing training, it is to provide a base, or it's to provide a common vocabulary. Some of the places where we need the predictability that comes from coach training are like what things are named, right? So that we have a taxonomy that we can all be able to utilize, and we know what words mean. There's predictability about the message that will be delivered, right? Also predictability about what athletes and parents can expect from being part of your program. Like, that comes with coach training. And then also maybe the mechanics that are taught, things along those lines. So one of the important things about at the end of training, that the answers to questions do not matter based on who was asked. So to get to Kristen's analogy of the volunteer fire department, they are trained to think the same. When they get into a situation, they all respond in a very certain and, because safety depends on it, a very predictable way. That they will make decisions the same way. And it doesn't matter who you ask, whether it be the battalion chief or the volunteer that's on his or her first response, that the answers to those questions are going to be the same. All right, so what is education for our purposes today? It's basically teaching people how to think differently or how to innovate. So when we think about coach education, and as we just heard, particularly in the higher education setting, yes, we do some training, but we're also encouraging our faculty and our students to be looking for new ways to do things. Can we do it better? All right, so some of the things where innovation or education become very important is how do we think about the experiences that the people are having in youth sports? How do we deliver the message? So if the message is going to be predictable, we need some innovation, and we need to educate our coaches on different ways in which to deliver the message. How best to serve. Right? Again, part of our process here is to be in a public service. How best to serve our athletes and our families. And then different ways for teaching a technique, things along those lines. So when we are educating coaches, what becomes very important is, like, are we even asking the right question in the first place? Like, how can we be innovative? Are we looking for answers to a question that we need to be asking? So I believe everyone in the audience, I don't need to convince you, but we need both, all right? And really good coach development includes both of these things. We need predictability. People need to know what's going to happen, and we really need a demographic of coaches that will respond to certain situations in a very predictable way. So this is by far an exhaustive list, but these are some of the places where coach training right now has been referred to as that kind of minimum floor that we're looking for in all coaching situations. But these kinds of things, they've been through safe sport training. More and more legislation is requiring concussion awareness training, concussion response training, intervention, injury prevention and response. And then also, as we also saw from Andy's presentation, there's some sort of athlete-centered philosophy that is part of most of that kind of minimum training that's required, particularly within the NGBs. Some things with education, and again, not an exhaustive list, technique and tactics, like a whole bunch of T things up there. I'm going to talk mostly in the last few minutes that I have about the relationships part, and that a really well-educated coach understands how important the various relationships in the youth sport ecosystem are. But I also do want to give kind of this, bold thing about the research and having coaches and coach developers that are capable of asking good questions and designing research that will help us find meaningful and important answers to those questions. And a shout out as part of the National Youth Sports Strategy of kind of moving some funding in a direction where there's incentive for the people who are good at doing that research and have the opportunity to do that research. We'll have some funding and some facilities in which to conduct that research to help us answer those questions. All right, so hopefully everybody on the same page, we're good here? All right, so this is a 1/4-inch drill bit, and people buy thousands of these every single year. There is a concept in product development, and I think one of the ways, this kind of novel way of looking at what we're doing in terms of coach development, is to think about, like, what are we really developing? What are, who's the customer? What are we really selling here in terms of that? Well, it turns out that people don't buy 1/4-inch drill bits so that they can say that they own 1/4-inch drill bits. They buy them because they need a 1/4-inch hole. The theory is called jobs to be done theory. Maybe a more appropriate graphic for us is this one. It's like the skateboard manufacturers sell the stuff that's on the left there, right? And they think in terms of carbon fiber decks, like these hollow, very light trucks, the super sticky wheels, like all of the innovation goes into the aspects of the product. When what people are really buying is the thing on your right, which is that experience. Like they go to the store and they buy this, but what's really going on in their head is the freedom and awesome feeling of like riding a skateboard and doing cool stuff. So the question is, when we look at coach development, and particularly like kind of where do we go from here, are we focusing more on the elements of the board? Are we making a better board, right? Are we making better wheels or lighter bolts? Or are we focusing on how do we help more people get that experience? So a way to frame the question is, what job are families hiring youth sports to do? And particularly in this conversation about a national public health initiative that thankfully is now actually being seriously considered by the federal government, because I've always thought just like youth sports a really wasted opportunity for a collective youth public health initiative. So the question is, what job are families hiring us to do? So we might kind of see it this way, right? They're hiring us to have a place to drop their kid off, right? So that they can have 45 minutes 3 times a week apiece. I don't know that, but we see this picture kind of all the time. Maybe this is what they're expecting. They're expecting to have to come in and be the advocate for their child, and that leads to those kinds of things. We have a graphic representation of this. Many of you are familiar with the athlete triangle. This we refer to as the inverted one, but you see the coach, parent, and athlete, and in this particular version of youth sport, the athlete gets input from both the coaches and the parents, and it's up to them to balance these two inputs and somehow try and keep 2 very meaningful adults in their life happy at the same time. The good news is there's an alternative, and as Kristen said, I've spent most of the last like 15, 20 years in equal amounts in academia, in consulting with coaches, and being a coach myself. And in working with families, one of the things that I've been part of the Positive Coaching Alliance for like 20 years now, but in talking with parents, they're basically after a couple of things. They are actually hiring youth sports to do a couple things. One, they want their children to be better athletes. They want them to be healthy. They want them to understand physical work. They want them to learn a sport. They want them to be able to transfer those skills to other things. They basically want them to be healthy. And yeah, and you know what? It's cool if they're very successful at that sport, but in interviewing and talking with thousands of parents, they really want them to have a good experience. The second thing is that they want them to be better people. And if you're familiar with the Positive Coaching Alliance, you recognize those two statements. Overwhelmingly, 90% of the things that they say that they want their child to get out of their youth sport experience are life lessons related. Be more resilient, be a good teammate, learn to deal with failure, learn the value of hard work, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that has started to come up in the later is that families are also looking for kind of a shared, meaningful experience with their child. And the good news is that if we kind of think about that athletic triangle, we have the opportunity to teach coaches, to develop coaches to be able to work within these relationships, to be able to basically give people what they've hired us to do. The better athletes part is a natural consequence of a good coach-athlete relationship. The better people part actually comes from having a strong coach-parent relationship so that they are always reinforcing each other in terms of teaching of life lessons. And being in a healthy environment allows for the children and their parents to be able to have great memories of that activity. what's super important here is that like all of these things contribute to the longevity of families staying in youth sports. And longevity is one of the most important things, not only for long-term athlete development, but for improved national health. So I think we've been trying to deliver this, or we thought that we had to. We thought this is what families were buying. This is the job they've hired us to do. When I actually think, in working with families, and working with academics, that they're really after more of this. Thank you.